Hi, class. I'm coming to you live. You should see the outtakes of this lecture someday. But today I'm coming to you live to cover the effective principles for interpersonal relationships. These are chapters 8 and 9, and we're just going to go kind of fast through this. I only have 15 minutes, and you know I'm way more long-winded than that. So I if you think about how this chapter relates to where we are right now, sheltered in place, I don't think any of us had any idea about how much focus we were going to have on relationships because we were going to be in such close confines with those that we love for an extended period of time. In fact, we don't even know how long we're going to be doing this, do we? But it's a great time to focus on having effective communication. Remember, this class is both public and private communication, and we have a little bit more time now to focus on the interpersonal part. And I think that this reminds us a little bit of the first week of class. I hope it does you. Remember, we wrote those advertisements for effective living situations, and we also talked a little bit about this. I said it wasn't going to be on the test, but this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this keeps coming into my mind as we endure this shelter in place situation that we're in. And when I think about it, this would be a great thing to think about for your persuasive speech as well. So if you think about where we are, we're trying to focus on our base level needs down here. The bottom two tiers are rungs of this Maslow's hierarchy are your physical needs, which means food, water, shelter, sex, and just staying well, health, being able to breathe, those kind of things that COVID is really trying to take away from us. But we're spending a lot of time talking at the base level, aren't we? And then we're also wearing masks and gloves and wondering what we should do to go get groceries or if we should have them delivered in. And many of you don't have the luxury of making those decisions because you've been deemed essential. And you have to leave the confines, the safety of your home to go provide for your families or provide for your future by getting your hourly wage, by being a checkout person or someone who delivers food. And so, I think about that because this is a motivational structure, and you know that we all have needs in these areas, and many of you are worried about your safety. I'm worried about your safety right now. I'm worried about my safety and those that I love. And when you're focused on these base levels, it's hard to think about your relationships. But that's what we're going to talk about today. That's considered an upper level need according to Maslow. And then once those are intact, you can be thinking about your self-esteem. Don't you like my whiteboard? And then only then can you focus on self-actualization. And a lot of us are thinking, how can I use this time to perfect myself? Not that we're going for a perfection, but to take up something that I've been wanting to maybe do a gratitude journal, which is great for your happiness project, to meditate, again, great for your happiness project, maybe to learn an instrument, maybe to paint. I hope that you have the luxury of time and the supplies on hand that you can focus on those. But I feel like the majority of our energy on a daily basis now is getting information about this disease and how we can be safe from it. So I think that this was a very pertinent part. So if you go back and review those first week notes, you're going to find that. You're also going to find a list of things that separate impersonal from interpersonal relationships. Those would be that when you're interpersonal, you are unique. You are interdependent. I've heard that word more and more mentioned because of COVID. I mean, never did we think about how interconnected we are. And we think about these people who have been traveling and come back and don't even know they're carriers, and then they infect people. And I've heard the analogy, the colorful language of calling them embers, and they can start a fire in a whole new geographic area just by going home if they've been to, let's say, Panama City Beach or New Orleans, and then they come back to their communities and they don't know that they're infected, so they don't take precautions, and then they have this whole little fire of COVID-19. So interdependence, that our people are irreplaceable when we are interpersonal. I have heard so many sad stories about people not being able to go to the hospital, with people who are going there for things not related to this pandemic, but because our hospitals are now shut down from visitors, if you would be in a car accident, it could be that your family won't be able to go see you there. And that affects this hierarchy of needs. But it also shows that that we put a lot of emphasis and we took a lot for granted in our interpersonal relationships, didn't we? Also, other things in interpersonal relationships, they have disclosure. This is mutual. I tell you something, you expect me to tell you something back. They offer intrinsic rewards, just feelings of belonging. Maybe we're missing those and we're trying to connect with Zoom and all kinds of technology that still lacks that intrinsic connection of being in someone's presence, doesn't it? And we also know that these are scarce. I feel like now that we have this extended time with people that we're not used to having the luxury of time with, that we start treating them less nice because we think, oh, I've got to deal with this again tomorrow all day. So be careful with that one. But we're going to talk a little bit about chapters 8 and 9, and I've included the book PowerPoints on that, but I want to just highlight, because that's what the quiz is going to be over, is what the text has to say. So I want to highlight certain parts and theories. We talk a lot, when we deal with interpersonal relationship, the focus is usually on the dyad, which means you and one other person. When we have more people involved, it gets into different types of communication, which we often call small group. And there's a class for that if you're interested. It is being offered this summer. So when we think about that, there's a whole lot of theories that surround who we end up forming interpersonal relationships with. Because as you know, there is a whole sea of people out there, and that sometimes we just don't connect with all of them. In fact, it's good that we don't connect with all of them, because there are a lot of expectations when you're in an interpersonal relationship with somebody. One is that you will stop and have conversations. And I've noticed that I have some neighbors and things like that I feel like are hurting right now and are lonely right now. And there's an expectation for me to have these conversations. And it takes a lot of time to keep connecting and calling in and checking in on people that are alone right now. But I do think it's really important. And I think it's one of the requirements of being in interpersonal relationships with people. So some of the things that determine who you will be in relationship with, these are called theories of connection, and one of them is the attraction theory. And so the attraction theory is pretty simple. It says that you will form relationships with people that you find attractive. Ha ha! Someone spent a lot of time researching that. Go figure. But we got to realize that there are people who are physically attractive, and until you get to know them, they're really pretty, really good looking until you get to know them, and then they become less attractive. And then there's a whole nother camp of people that are moderately attractive, but the more you get to know them, they become more attractive through their behaviors and their communication style. So the attraction theory says that those people that you find attractive, you will hire more, you will give more time, have more conversations with, allow them to get into your social circle, and because that takes small talk. A lot of times, you before you start seeing people, you have a lot of those pre-behaviors. So the book talks a lot about what we find attractive, and one thing that we find attractive generally is people that are in close contact with us. So while we may find people who are on television really attractive, knowing that we're probably never going to cross paths with them takes away that the function that could really be happening. So we spend a lot of our efforts trying to connect with people around us. That makes sense, doesn't it? Now, I do think that online has made your world a whole lot bigger. So if you were in a secluded rural area and you have internet, you have a whole lot more people that are are available for connection than used to be. We generally also are drawn to people we think are similar to us. Now, I used to hear a lot that opposites attract, but what we have found is that while they may attract, similarities generally last. in terms of relationships. And a lot of that has to do with value similarities instead of personality similarities. You might see a lot of extroverts in relationships with introverts because I've been told you can't both talk at the same time. But most of the time, it's those value similarities that are very important. So be aware of that when you are picking partners. There's Mark Knapp had this staircase model of how it usually happens. And so I would say that you should check out that ABCDE pattern of connection. But know that it's not always a straight path. So, and I think those are where the richness of stories happen, that a lot of relationships don't necessarily go as you would predict them to, and that doesn't invalidate them. So when you think about this, it seems like we're concentrating a lot on romantic relationships, but you can apply a lot of these theories to friendships as well. And just know that when you define a friendship, it has to be mutually beneficial for it to be a friendship. So when things become toxic, they don't always meet that definition of friendship anymore, because there should be a mutual reinforcement there. So check out self-disclosure. We've already talked about that. The social penetration theory is another model of self-disclosure. We use the Johari window, but the social penetration model deals with the depth and breadth of disclosure. And so generally we go beyond the surface level exchange with people with whom we're interpersonal. We give them the things that might have more ammunition attached to them, but because there's more trust involved. So, but self-disclosure is important, and it's really covered a lot in chapter 8, even though we've already talked about that. The relational dialectics theory, I always found that interesting when I was studying this in college. It's also now called dialectical tensions, but there are these wants in relationship, and we used to talk about them in terms of 3, and they still do, 3 things that compete. So when you think about it, we have these wants to be independent, and then this need to be in relationship with other people. And there's this push and pull in relationships. So, and I think that you have to come to agreement on some of this, like how much away time is allowed in your relationship. How often do friends need to check in on you and to be considered friends? Is it okay to go a year without seeing somebody? Openness versus closedness. Is there room in your relationship for having people not know everything? Or do you distrust that? And predictability versus novelty. A lot of times we become creatures of habit, but people sometimes think of that as boring. There was a movie that popularized that when I was a long time ago, and they talked about this relationship that seemed to be getting stale, and it was like every Wednesday was sandwich night, and how just revolting that was to people because they didn't want their lives to be that predictable at all. And so chapter 8 goes into a lot of these reasons why we connect with some people and why we don't. And some of that is we just don't even let that get started. We write people off. We walk by them instead of introducing ourselves. So we never even get Mark Knapp's stair-step model started in relationships. I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to start with chapter 9 on the next video.